Genesis 5. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. Now, if you go to the King James Version, this says he named them Adam. So I guess the name Adam kind of just means mankind. Also, it's good to point out that this is the written account of Adam's family line, but it's really talking about the line that leads to Jesus. Like, this is the line from Adam that produces Noah, that produces Abraham, that produces David, and eventually goes to Jesus. It's not concerned with any of the other people that Adam gives birth to, or that Adam's wife gives birth to, or that it's not concerned with any other lineage, just the one that leads to Jesus. So it's interesting. It's good to point out here, because I noticed when I read through this real quick beforehand that it didn't mention Cain, didn't mention Abel, just mentioning specifically the people that will eventually lead to Jesus. So verse 3, when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. So Seth, if we go back to Genesis 4, Seth was the one who replaced Abel after Cain kills Abel. Seth is the one who, when Seth is born, that's when people begin to worship God. So Seth, it's interesting because it says Seth he's born and he's a man in the likeness, in the image of Adam. And it's interesting because Adam is made in the image of God. And it's even more interesting because if we go back to Genesis 1, we search for image. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So it's interesting that Seth is made in Adam's image, and Adam is made in God's image. And, Seth is the line that leads to Jesus. The line that leads to Jesus is the line that is most closely in the image of God. And it's important that they're in the image of God because here it says, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over all of this stuff on the earth." So without being made in the image of God, whatever that may mean, maybe it's the physical image, maybe it's the personality image, maybe it's the capabilities image, he's making them like himself. And it's important that he does that because if they weren't made in the image of God, they likely wouldn't have, or at least I believe that's the implication here, if they weren't made in the image of God, they wouldn't have power over the fish or the birds or the livestock or the wild animals. And I think what it's really getting at is, God is the truth about reality. Like, God is reality. God created all of this stuff, and he's consistent, he's constant. The more you know about God, the more you understand reality. And it's true in our own lives, certainly, that the more we understand about reality, the more truth we know about the world around us, the better we can manage it, the better we can move through life, the better we can control the world around us. You can't manipulate the world around you without understanding it. You can't build a building without understanding how physics works to some degree, right? You can't do plumbing without understanding how water flows. You have to be close to the truth about reality in order to do anything effectively in this life. So I think that's really interesting because God makes man in his own image, and then we're looking at the line that leads to Jesus, and that whole line it closely resembles the image of God. And I think that's no mistake that the people that are closer to God have a better understanding of reality. And a lot of people would say, a lot of people that believe in God are just crazy. They don't understand anything about reality. They don't believe science. They're just this cult of religious people who just believe in a big man in the sky. And it's like, that's not, lots of people claim to be Christians. Lots of people claim to be lots of things. But truly, the people that are close to God are the people that are close to the truth about reality. and they understand things well enough because of that to actually be able to rule over the world around them. So I thought that was really interesting and worth pointing out. Go back to Genesis 5 here. So Seth was born. Seth is, born in Adam's own likeness, in his own image. So after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived a total of 930 years, and then he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. After he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived a total of 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. After he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived a total of 905 years, and then he died. So this is just kind of repetitive, but the point is to show each generation in the line that leads to Noah and eventually to Jesus. But it's interesting that they live so long. Like, I'm looking at these ages. This is insane. And I think this is part of the reason why people don't believe that a day in the beginning was really a 24-hour day and night cycle, the way we know a day to be today. Like, I think a lot of people would say, well, obviously they didn't live 905 years. Like, that's crazy. But what I think is going on here is, or at least what I've thought for a while, to kind of justify this, and not just to justify this, but really a genuinely, a theory that I hold because I believe it's interesting and because I believe that it could actually explain what is going on here with these ages. So when God creates Adam, he creates this perfect being. And that perfect being would, of course, have perfect DNA. That DNA would be able to replicate forever because Adam wasn't supposed to die. So according to the story, God creates a man who's not supposed to die. That man would have DNA that's perfect. It's going to replicate forever. But because he corrupts that perfect creation, Adam, when he eats the fruit, that DNA is no longer perfect. It's corrupted. But because he's still the original perfect model, he just corrupts himself. He messes things up. He messes up his life. He messes up his DNA. He messes up his being, his physical being. He's going to die. But he's still really well made. He still lasts however long it says he lasts, like 930 years, right? Adam lives for 930 years. His DNA is strong. If he gets a wound, his DNA knows how to heal his body, right? And all these people, the original lineage of Adam, they're all living super long times. And I believe that's because that DNA, it begins to degrade with each generation, but from the beginning, it was really, really good quality DNA. And with each generation, it degrades a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and then you get to us today, right? And after Noah, God says man will only live 120 years. And today, people don't really live 120 years. They can get close, but they don't live past 120 years. So I think that's interesting, but I think what's going on, if you want to think about it, I guess on a less, if you want to get into the fine details of it, how it might work scientifically, I think this might be an interesting theory to consider. Not that I'm saying it's accurate or anything, but maybe the DNA started out perfect, and then over the generations, it's just degrading more and more until today you have the people, we're living an average of like 70-something years, depending on where you go, maybe 80, 90 years, nowhere near 900 years. And people would think this isn't even possible based on how long we live today. But could it be possible that the DNA has just been deteriorating over time, which is kind of like the opposite theory of what evolution is, which is that, life started out very simple DNA, and then over a huge period of time, a huge span of time, that life form mutated, the DNA mutated enough times to produce new genetics and to produce new species. So the theory of evolution is kind of saying like, all right, so DNA started out really simple, and then over time, through mutation, through kind of like freak accidents, not to frame it that way, but like through unexpected mutations, that DNA changed into something better, into something more capable, into something that could last a longer time. We went from very simple life forms into complex life forms that can live, over 100 years. And who knows how long the first life forms were alive. But, in that theory, DNA is actually improving. In the theory that I'm talking about here, DNA is actually degrading. And I've always thought that it's kind of like, hand-me-downs, like a hand-me-down tool set or a hand-me-down outfit. The first person that has it, it looks great. They last a long time. They pass them down. And over the generations, the tools just get beat up. The outfit just gets beat up. And you might have it for a long time, but towards the end of its life, it's starting to get tattered. And I think it's also interesting that, God punishes Adam. He says, you will surely die as a result of eating this fruit. And Adam, if we go back to the beginning of this verse, he names mankind Adam. We saw in the King James Version. Adam represents all of mankind. All of mankind is going to die. Right? Adam gets 930 years, but mankind, we're not born perfect. We're born degraded. We're born deteriorated, according to the Bible. We're born corrupt, and we don't live long. And I think it's just going to keep getting worse and worse until eventually we just die out. The DNA that gets passed on to the next generation, it's just going to get weaker and weaker. And I think that this description of the lineage of Adam kind of plays into that theory. But I've had that theory for a long time, and it's separate from the Bible. It had nothing to do with the Bible when I started thinking about it. It had a lot more to do with looking at trees and wondering, all right, so this tree, look at this beautiful tree, and it's got acorns on it. It produced those acorns, but there's a knot on the tree. There's a weird growth on the tree. It's deformed. The tree is beautiful, but this one part of it is deformed. So it has this mutation, this deformity, and then it has these acorns. So somewhere in the DNA of those acorns, there's a mutation. There's a potential for those acorns to grow into trees that are also mutated, that also have this unfortunate thing on them that doesn't help them. It makes them weaker. It exposes them to more kinds of infiltration from bugs and from bacteria. It makes the trees weaker. So if those acorns then grow into trees themselves, and their DNA is corrupted further for whatever reason, maybe a cold winter, maybe too much heat, the DNA gets a little bit deteriorated, or maybe the DNA itself just gets weaker over time, won't those trees grow into the next generation of trees and they'll be a little bit weaker? Maybe they get the growth, but also maybe now their genetics are a little bit damaged for whatever reason, and now that tree is a little bit weaker, and the acorns that come off of that tree go through a hard life, and then they're a little bit weaker, and then just keeps going down the line until that tree gets weaker and weaker, until eventually that type of tree just dies out. It can't stand the harsh environment. And that's kind of where that theory comes from. And when you look at the lifespans here in this genealogy, it kind of goes along with that theory, which is in opposition to the theory of evolution, which is kind of like it's the opposite. It's saying, with those mutations, we get stronger. With those mutations, our genes improve, and we're better able to withstand the environments that we're in. And it's like, maybe so, but I think the number of mutations that result in a negative impact to our DNA and to our genes, those are a lot more frequent than if there are any that are beneficial. The ones that are not beneficial, the ones that are detrimental, are far more frequent than the ones that would be beneficial. So I just don't see how we could actually be making those improvements. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Let's go ahead and jump back into this here. So we were talking about Kenan. Kenan lived a total of 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. And Kenan gives his offspring as Mahalalel. I think maybe I skipped that. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. After he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Mahalalel lived a total of 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. After he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived a total of 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. So this is kind of an oddity in this lineage here, because it doesn't say that he died. It says something to the effect of because he walked faithfully with God, which means because he followed the will of God, God took him away. What does that mean? It says he lived a total of 365 years. So is this implying that that is the total number of years that he lived? I think so. That's the way I read it. But it doesn't say that he died. It just says that God took him away. So maybe this is kind of hinting at, spiritual death, spiritual life. Maybe the physical bodies and the spirits die here, like Jared, for instance, lives 962 years and then he dies. Is this saying like the body of Jared dies, or like the body and the spirit in Jared dies? And maybe Enoch, his body lives 365 years, but then his spirit goes with God. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what this means, but this is really interesting. I also think it's interesting that we have 365 years, which is, pretty much a year is 365 days. I think it's just interesting that that coincides with the full cycle of a year on the earth. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I'm not really sure what to make of this, but it certainly stands out. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. After he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived a total of 969 years, and then he died. So Lamech, this is the same name of the offspring of Cain, the guy that murdered a young man for injuring him. So, interesting choice of name. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it does. But Lamech then gives birth to Noah. And a lot of people know who Noah is. So when Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived a total of 777 years, and then he died. So 7 is supposedly the number of completion. 777, that's a pretty significant number. It's interesting because that number, you can even go to a casino and, if you get all sevens to come up on a slot machine, you're the winner. Like, this number has significance all throughout history, even up until today. It's a significant number, and there's a reason for that. So here, even in the Bible, we see 777 years, and we'll notice after Noah, God says the years of man will be limited to 120. So we're not going to see people living these crazy long lifespans. And Lamech is the father of Noah. He's the last one from the generation. Well, I suppose Noah is the last one from that generation. From the group of people that live really long times. Like, Lamech is like the father of the last guy to live for a really long time. And he lives 777 years, which is like a number of completion. It's kind of like saying, like, this is the end of an era. Like, this guy's life, this is the end of an era. There's the people that lived before Noah. This guy lived 777 years. This is the end of that era. Then we have Noah. He's kind of like the bridge. And after Noah, now people are only living 120 years. So I think that's interesting, and I think it's significant that you see the 777. I also think there's some significance to this 365, just because, 365 days in a year. And interestingly, this guy, for whatever reason, it doesn't say that he dies. It says God took him away. So both of those pretty interesting spans of time. And then it says, after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And those are familiar names. And in the next chapter, I think it'll probably talk about the story of Noah and these guys here and how they build the ark. So if anybody has any commentary, if anybody knows anything else about like the 777 years of Lamech, or about the 365 days of Enoch, or what it means here, what it's talking about, it doesn't mention that he dies. What happened to this guy? If anybody understands any of that or has any other input on Genesis chapter 5, please go ahead and leave a comment. Reach out. Would love to talk about it more. But that's all I got for today. So thanks for listening and have a good one.